Hey, it's that time of week again, 6 p.m. Sundays. Welcome to Steve's Place. Um, Before we get to our guest, Danute Debney, let me remind everyone that we'll be having our conference coming up here in August, August 9th to 13th. Now's the time to sign. It's the last week we're going to have 35% off. So be sure to get your registration. Give me a call, 520-463-1994. After the show or during the week, still ends on January 31st. We have a lot of good speakers this year. Maury King will be there again this year, and he'll be talking about Walt Jenkins' technology. And for those who haven't heard, unfortunately, Walt is no longer with us. Um, anyway, so don't forget August 9th to 13th. Now, we have our Tesla Tech YouTube channel. I know a lot of you are watching on there. And I encourage everyone, if you're not a member already, to become a member. Join. It's for $9.99. You get 24/7 access to all of our videos. And and the easiest way of getting there is go to teslatech.info and you go to the yellow box there and you go to the YouTube channel. We also have a conference directory up there where you can select conferences that you might be interested in. And once you do that, it lists all the speakers of that conference into there, or the speaker. You click on a speaker, and it brings up all the videos up there that we have underneath that speaker. So if you get a chance, go up there, check it out, become a member. You can join for $9.99. Get global access from anywhere. You get a member badge. It tells you just by the color of the badge, it tells you how long you've been a member. And like I say, get the $9.99 exclusive member option. There's a $3 option, but that's just to get a badge. To see all the videos, you have to become an exclusive member. It's $9.99. I encourage you all to join. And right now, let me introduce you to Danute Debney, and she's a world-renowned author on decision and a strategist. And she's going to teach us tonight how we can improve our decision making. And so, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, I certainly do. Hi there, Steve. Thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm delighted to be here. I'm delighted to share some of the ideas that we'll be talking about tonight. I have a little bit of an intro on my own background. I have over 25 years in management, organization, and law. On one hand, which includes work in the aviation industry, in the broadcast industry, in the federal court system, working in not-for-profit, which has allowed me to have a vast kind of textual experience of the kinds of challenges that people go through. Challenges in entrepreneurship, in business, in their personal lives. I've worked for 5 years for the Federal Bankruptcy Court, which has given me a perspective on how lives fall apart, how they get put together or they don't, how large corporations fall apart, how small businesses fall apart, how they do come together, how they don't. So that has very much informed my perspective on decision strategy. And then on the other hand, there is another aspect of this. There's my own personal background. I come from a family that went through a great deal in World War II in Eastern Europe. I'm a first generation born here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, but my parents are from Eastern Europe, and my mother and grandmother spent time in a Siberian labor camp. And my father was in a German labor camp, and my brother and I were late children for them. But the interesting thing about that kind of upbringing is that I got to hear secondhand, of course, I didn't live it, though as a child, sometimes I felt like I was living it. I got to hear how people got through all sorts of challenges, how they had to deal with innovation, how they had to work on personal resources and their own sense of, subjective awareness, as well as rational cunning, if you will, to get through some very, very challenging and traumatic experiences and to get themselves out into the world to live a whole other type of life. So with all of that combined background, it has brought me to this place of decision strategy innovation. And one more thing that I'd like to say about that is when I say decision strategy innovation, there are many ways to undertake it. I'm working from a paradigm where we as individuals engage our internal subjective awareness first. That's where we go first to see how we're scoping out the picture, what kind of information we are getting, what are we perceiving, what does this picture look like? And then we go to the rational, which is, of course, critical. I'm not suggesting we throw the rational out. And then where necessary or where helpful, we go to the not to the intuitive, but the rational, and then the creative. It's the creative is the third element of that triumvirate of internal capabilities, tools, and skills that we bring to the outer world, where we then navigate our lives and our businesses and our entrepreneurship.
Okay, well, without further ado, why don't you just go ahead and delve into your topic here, how the Tin Man found his brain.
So before I go to the next slide, How the Tin Man Found His Brain is a book that I have written, and I wrote it as an example of the kind of work that I engage in. It was originally meant to sort of be a calling card for that effort. But it's really something much more than that. Let me go into this opening here. And I think I need to be able to see the screen a little bit better. Okay, so here it is. My personal professional background, I've told you about. The reason that I got into the book, I will go into in just a moment. But what I would like to do before I do that, I'd like to tie something into that personal and professional experience that I had. There was a moment in time when I came to a certain awareness. And it's not that this one story that I tell you is the full picture of that awareness, but it exemplifies what note was struck within me. And I believe everybody has that birth moment somewhere when they realize that they could be appreciating more, they could be working with more, they could be doing things in a much bigger way with greater understanding and greater perceptual awareness. So let me tell you this story, which I have noted here as the emergency room story. It appears in the preface of my book, and it takes place in New Mexico. Where will you be when you discover that everything has changed? That's what the advertisement said. I can't remember the product associated with the advertisements, which probably means it was catchy, however, not really effective for its purpose. But I still remember a woman floating in a pool of water, and the view was of someone seeing her directly above the pool. Everything had changed. It was a starry, starry night, reminiscent of the way Van Gogh must have seen it. 2:30 in the morning, and here I was, stepping out of the car to go to an emergency center. This one was located in the northeast heights of the city, and the twinkling lights below shone toward the valley were very few and far between at this hour. The darkness above and a certain kind of brilliance and velvety quality present. Deep blue ink dappled with specks of milky stars. In New Mexico, it always seems to feel the sky is reaching down to kiss the land. At night, it feels even more so, like being in a planetarium. The scene inside was a bit surreal as well. It was a modern building that appeared relatively new and spacious. Strangely, the ER lights seemed to be out, except for a couple spotlights over the front desk, and not a soul was in the waiting room. Approaching the desk, a lone hospital staff member checked me in, asking me to sit down and wait. It wouldn't be long before a doctor could see me. And before having a chance to fully take in the surroundings, I was called back to the examining area. Emergency rooms were not much on my itinerary in life before this night, and being focused on feeling so oddly and vaguely unwell, it didn't occur to me at the time that no one seemed to be around in the reception or examining area. When the doctor came into my room and introduced himself, the last element of this vaguely unreal episode presented itself. He was tall, very pleasant looking, slim man, dressed in casual jeans and boots with what I recall was a pale yellow shirt. No smock or coat. He could have been an interested bypasser coming to visit with me. I never met a mere a more I'm sorry, I never met a more seemingly relaxed doctor in my life, speaking and acting almost as if in slow motion. While the doctor was asking questions and observing me, I couldn't help but observe him. He wasn't missing a thing. He, of course, had taken my pulse and blood pressure and listened to my heart, and now the doctor was studying all the other details: my eyes for pupil dilation, my skin to see if it was damp or dry or fevered, etc. Shortly, he pronounced that he had lost a number of emergency room patients in his career, but that I wasn't going to be one of them, and that he rarely experienced a patient in these circumstances who was as articulate about explaining what was going on. The doctor proceeded to offer his recommendations and suggested that I follow up with a physician, and if I did not have one, he could recommend one. Well, being both relieved about the level of urgency in my current conditions, as well as complimented by his analysis of my demeanor, my attention turned to inquiring about the doctor's work here in the emergency center. I felt naturally curious about the doctor and his work, although what is natural about coming to an emergency room in physical distress in the middle of the night and ending up interviewing the doctor? He simply didn't look or act like an ER doctor, or at least my notion of an ER doctor. I was expecting him to tell me that he had just emerged from years of studying philosophy, or working with some remote medical scientists in Tibet, or perhaps just meditating informally as a lone cowboy out on the range in the West. The doctor explained that the work he did was in some way like the joke about the airline pilot, sometimes experiencing hours of boredom followed by minutes of sheer panic if something had gone wrong. And this is when a puzzle piece dropped into place. I was about to receive an important lesson in the experience and use of subjective time and decision making. One of the many important intuitive lessons that I would now begin to learn very consciously as time went on. Although I didn't know it then, these lessons would become vital tools in the progress of my own life, assisting me in developing an understanding of opportunities, identifying new insights, forging the resilience and resourcefulness necessary to navigate challenging life circumstances, and developing the inner confidence in dealing with important, occasionally critical decision making. He went on to explain by way of example how sometimes an emergency case would come in and he wouldn't have the benefit of any medical history. There'd be no apparent wound, but the patient would be unconscious and be crashing. I had never heard that expression before, but it apparently referred to a situation which meant the vital signs were all going down, and that without some kind of successful intervention, the patient would be dead shortly. The doctor pointed out that it was of no use to give in to any form of panic or fear. He had to do what he was trained for and committed to do: try and save the patient. My doctor further elaborated on his strategy of action. He would concentrate his focus directly on the patient, pulling in all of the information he gathered rapidly as the seconds ticked away, going down a mental checklist without affording to forget anything or allowing himself to feel hurried. In essence, his personal sense of time needed to slow down, and his subjective awareness had to heighten in order to allow him to consider all of the possibilities without missing something. It was his obligation to do everything for his patient that he could. He couldn't skip considering any reasonable and/or inspired possibility that came to him, all the while giving instructions to the ER team as to the likely course of diagnosis or treatment as they fell into place. So while the doctor may have had mere minutes to consider the medical possibilities of action, in his mind, he had to experience his review of options as if he was in a much slower time frame, a review out of step with the speed of objective time. The doctor said there was no other way to make sure he wouldn't have missed an option or possibility. The unfolding of his subjective experience of a critical ER moment made me think of why medicine is often called both an art and a science, an integration of all that the mind can draw upon in its storehouse of information and training, arriving at times at an extrapolation into a visionary solution. He then said something that seemed truly poignant. The doctor said he had known He had to know he'd done everything he could to help his patient stay alive. And if he couldn't help him do that, he would stay with the patient till the patient passed on, being there for him. The doctor felt the best he could do in such a case was to be present to comfort his patient's passing. Wow. When I asked whether these experiences tended to take a toll on him, he said the last unusual comment that I remember. While his duty and purpose, as well as his commitment, was to keep all his ER patients alive, for those for whom nothing more could be done, well, he felt that there were worse things in life than dying. Maybe the doctor had spent time studying in Tibet after all. It was only in the years that followed that I was to realize just how powerful that night's experience was for me personally, and how much the realization that came from that night was to become a part of my work in life. I was to explore and learn about how the way we choose to view our experiences, the way we allow ourselves to navigate or go through them, can not only be vastly different, but can make a vast difference in the potentials of the situation, as well as the outcomes, between being a prisoner of war with the circumstances or someone in the process of discovery and understanding. This discovery and understanding allows for the birth of a new vision. And with the new vision come new options and sometimes the development of yet a whole new understanding. And that is the preface to my book. And that was really the time that I started to become very, very conscious about the importance of where my life had come from and where it could yet unfold in a way that could be of assistance and of facilitation for others to expand their barriers of perception. In fact, what I would often do when I would do workshops and seminars is I would bring in a frame. I don't have one here that could have fit properly, or I would have used it. A frame, a picture frame, and say to people, what we see within the picture frame is just what we see and know. It doesn't mean that there isn't a great deal more going on out there, and that perhaps we have ways of reaching perceptually for that larger picture. So let us get back into this. So leading into writing this book, How the Tin Man Found His Brain, I had a consultation with a businessman. He owned it was a privately owned company at that time, not publicly held. And he and his company were doing a big event in Arizona, or had done a big event in Arizona. He had been referred to me. I don't even recall through whom, because he had a fairly traumatic experience at this facility in Arizona, where they were having these sorts of team building experiences. A lot of his management people were there to, learn how to take better advantage of certain kinds of business opportunities, how to work together to do it. There were a variety of different speakers. And what he said to me with tremendous frustration was that a Qigong master had been booked for this occasion. And I'm just smiling internally, listening to him speak. This was a phone conversation. It was a phone consult. And he said that, this guy was kind of a hardcore businessman. This is kind of no nonsense. He doesn't believe in these kinds of, fluffy, airy-fairy theories and philosophies. And he just was irate. But he said, I paid for this. My company paid for this. And I was not going to skip it. So I attended this event. In attending this event, however, something really important and impactful happened. Whereas I had a gentle, soft pedal kind of awakening to something that I was already, living as part of and involved in. But this opened my eyes further. The man in this story here, the gentleman who was referred to me for this consultation, had the proverbial lightning bolt that got him pitched off of his horse. He said, and then now his voice got kind of smaller and quieter. And he said his whole life had changed having listened to this Qigong master. He couldn't think of his business in the same way. He didn't see his family in the same way. He didn't understand how he'd made the choices that he'd made and how he had looked at everything before, because now it was like the veil had been ripped from his eyes in a fairly brutal fashion. And he just didn't know what he was going to do from here on in. And he said to me, will I ever be normal again? And I said, well, I'm not a psychologist. That's not an area of my work effort. But if you're asking me, can you unknow, can you unsee, can you unperceive what you are now bringing into your realm of awareness? I don't think it works that way. So I gave him some ideas on authors he might want to read, people he might want to hear more from, specifically those who were working with new science, who were working with new thinking. And some of them had certain metaphysical crossover just because he'd had this experience with the Qigong master. I thought he would benefit with it. People like Greg Braden and others who come from a science background are now exploring new vistas of awareness scientifically as well as subjectively. And off he went. And I have no way of knowing what actually ended up becoming of this gentleman. But it was clear that his awareness was brought home in such a dramatic and sudden manner. For most of us, hopefully, it's not like that. But I think for everyone, somewhere along the line in their lives, they come to realize that there's more. There's more that they could be reaching for. And that more actually begins within themselves, with the inner awareness. We can get knowledge and information out here. Hopefully, as we bring it in and work with it, it becomes wisdom. But in the beginning, it all starts with us, within ourselves, our mind, our brain, our awakeness. So let me move on to this a little bit. Let me talk about a teeny bit about this book to just kind of circle back, because we'll be talking about the themes of the book, which are the themes of my work. And the purpose of this book that I wrote was threefold: as a backdrop regarding my own journey, to support others through their processes and challenges, and to spur exploration and stimulate thinking and investigation, so that many people, reading the book might actually know of some of the things I'm already talking about, but it could be rusty, it could be dusty, it could be something that's not in the center of their consciousness. And my role and my work, in whether I work with companies or organizations or individual people, and with their private lives or their businesses or their entrepreneurship, we have to work with this form of centeredness coming from the inside out. Why the Tin Man metaphor? Well, the answer already lies within us. And all we need to do is really discover it and implement it. And by that, I don't mean that all the science is already there, all the answers business-wise are already there, but very often, and you've all, I'm sure, read stories, heard stories, mathematicians, scientists, inventors, artists will have a dream or have a daydream. And I often do contemplation exercises with people, which are not exactly meditation, it doesn't go that deep, but where they get to ponder and explore certain premises that they are working with, because it's a lot of it is in there germinating. Our brains have so much power. We don't even have the full extent of that knowledge yet, how much they can do, how much they can reach for within us as well as without. And in these times, there's an incredible need for the most powerful of decision making, and more important than ever for everyone today, and certainly for entrepreneurs. This need was always there, but now with the speed of technology and the vast amounts of information, at the very least, we must clearly discern fact from fiction, founded information from opinion, inspiration from unfounded fantasy. Not only do we need to comprehend, but to discern and to work from a place of wisdom in our thoughts, plans, and actions. To work with vision and perception, as well as creativity and imagination. This is what life is about, not just good science and business. So when people say to me, is this about business? Is this about my personal life? You bring yourself and who you are into your business, into your science, into your math. That's who you bring to the table of all of this. So yes, and yes, and yes, it's about all of that. So what do we delve into with the Tin Man when I talk about these kinds of things? The birth of awareness, the incredible value and importance of consciousness in action, and the results of which that can foster development and strengthen self-trust. This is a huge theme in my book. It's a huge theme in my work. Because a lot of us, oh yeah, we hit on a good idea, and then there was this, and it kind of floated through and went, and sometimes another good idea comes, and sometimes an inspiration comes, or an intuition comes. It's there. It's all out there for us. And what the work that I'm going to be talking about here has to do with is the idea of grounding that more consciously with awareness, with consciousness, and therefore building greater self-trust, not only in that process, but also in what we can accomplish and how we can accomplish it. And then it kind of circles back. It's a circle again. With greater self-trust, we have the freedom for greater awareness and greater consciousness. And in this circle of activity within us and in how we interact with our own ideas, with the world around us, we can build on the impressions that we have, the visions that we have, the dreams that we have, the challenges. Often challenges, if need a bigger, broader, and more expansive way to be addressed and to be dealt with. So from a position of self-trust comes more possibility of strengthened subjective awareness, and that is inspiration, intuition, and imagination. And we don't have to look further than the achievements of brilliant and successful thinkers that many of us have come to view as mentors and inspiring forces. Nikola Tesla. We don't have to go too far. We've got Nikola Tesla as an example. Many of us know he invented, contributed to the invention of, or predicted the invention of what is now a countless list of technological advancement. Everything from electrical current, wireless transmission, robotics, and more. This was accomplished not just by reason and logic alone, but by the incorporation of vision, imagination, insight, and creativity. I'm going to repeat that because that's an important one. This kind of greater accomplishment, which frankly, we're all capable of in whatever field, whatever realm we choose to apply it. It's not done by logic alone, but by the incorporation of vision, imagination, insight, and creativity. All men and women who achieve a personal sense of success, fulfillment, and even greatness draw upon these same resources. In the work that I've done over the years, I've worked with many powerful people. And when I say powerful, powerful in a lot of different ways. Overtly out in the world, powerful, yes, but also subjectively powerful. And this kind of holistic effort was evidenced in every last one of them, whether they run around saying, I'm being subjectively aware, I'm conscious, I'm doing everything with self-trust. That's not what they're running around and saying, but they're using it, they're living it. We may not all be Teslas, but yes, we can achieve our own form of personal greatness by engaging the same type of inner tools and developing our skills, whether for our business, entrepreneurship, or in the happiness and satisfaction of our daily personal lives. Now, it's important to put a little caveat in here. This is not a magic bullet about becoming omniscient, knowing everything, and being able to conquer all challenge. This is about being able to rely on deeper, fuller resources so that what we're not doing is building a history of regrets. This is something else that I talk about. I don't go into it here in this presentation, but this idea of regret that often people live with. They didn't do this. They should have done that. They should have done the other. Also, another point I want to make before I go on to my next slide is the fact that it doesn't solve all of our issues. We have certain strengths and we have certain aspects of ourselves that are not as strong. So we naturally would like to play to our strengths, but we can't leave what we feel is more vulnerable and, in quotes, weaker behind. Because in order to live life in a fulsome fashion, we have to be fortified and prepared to be able to engage from a variety of different aspects and angles. So where does it all begin? Naturally at the beginning. It begins at the beginning, like with the Wizard of Oz. As is discussed in part 1 of the book, childhood beginnings. Some personal foundations I want to talk about here for a little bit. So it wasn't just that I had a family that went through a lot of traumas and tragedies and therefore fostered a sense of resilience or kind of proposed to me, insinuated to me some kind of direction of resilience. It was much more than that. I was very, very fortunate to grow up in a family that honored me as an individual, as a person, even as a child. And many people do not have the benefit of that. Most people are given what they can be given by parents. I think we can fairly say that the majority of parents try to do the best they can for their children. But what they're trying to do is prepare their children for the world out there. And they're also working with the limits of whatever tools they have. They're just people. We learn that as we grow up. They're just people. They did what they could. And often they did not honor these aspects of us as individuals. For me personally, my subjectivity was every bit as much supported as was objective reality, my objective world, going to school, studying, doing well, moving forward. It was worked on holistically because that's who they were and how they looked at things. And that to me was a tremendous benefit. So I started with that position as opposed to having to come to it as many of us do when we grow up and realize what's got to be dusted off and either rediscovered, redeveloped within ourselves. And so to go back to Tesla here, he credited his family for his success and referred to his mother as a formidable inventor herself. So he had very strong foundational beginnings that put him on this path. Yes, the man was a genius. Yes, the man was incredible in what he was able to accomplish. But he also was not daunted at the very beginning. He was not dulled. He was not knocked down. He didn't have to overcome those steps in order to emerge in the same sort of way. I'm not saying he didn't face any obstacles or that he did not have challenges. I'm not suggesting that. I'm just suggesting that he did have some strong modeling from which he really was able to work. We can only carry Tesla's example as far as his brilliance of the scientific and visionary mind. Because, for example, now here is someone who is gifted in so many ways, but not so much with finance. He did end up having some real challenges with finance. And so with all of us, as I've mentioned previously, we need to work on the different aspects and balances within ourselves. But if we work more strongly with our subjectivity, with our subjective awareness, with what we can perceive and learn about ourselves and discover that we need to know in order to help us with or makeup, whether that's intellectual or creative, whatever it is, we can figure all this out. See, most of us look at ourselves and say things like, oh, yes, well, I talk slowly, or I talk quickly, or I tend to be lazy, or I tend to be stubborn. We tend to learn these kinds of things about ourselves, whether we admit them or not to each other. We know these kinds of things about ourselves. But the truth is, we got to get really much friendlier with the essence of who we are inside. Using all of our internal resources does not guarantee we will have uniform brilliance and talent in all areas of life or categories of discipline. But utilizing more of the resources and capabilities we do have, and then understanding what we may need to learn, can propel and safeguard the outcomes of our focus. How do we get started learning from how we got started learning from the outside in, not how can we? How did we? It's because when we are put on track by our parents, a lot of people have called it programming. And in a way, it is programming. It's their job to teach us, to help us learn how to function in a structured societal context. And this is what they endeavor to do. They endeavor to help us sit up straight, pay attention to the teacher, don't go daydreaming off, don't, they kind of end up stifling that creativity a bit, not because they want to, and in some cases more than others. I mean, I could see people raising their hands and say, well, that didn't happen in my house, which is fantastic if that is the case. But all too often, that's what parents kind of try to do because they want to shape us up to get going, to get moving, to be successful. We learn that most of the information and knowledge must come from the outside world. That's the other part of it, not just the fact that you may be a little bit tamped down in terms of your imagination or the freedom of your creativity or your vision when you're a little kid, but also you're starting to learn that the answers are out there coming in, that it's always an authority that has to give you the answer. We learn of a kind of a gulf, even a polarity between our inner world and our outer world. And that creates more dissonance for some people than others. Hence why people, therapy is very beneficial for many people. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a therapist. I do work on decision strategy, but if I have a client or I'm consulting for someone, and I find that all the answers are laid out. We've parsed everything out. We've pulled it out. We're looking at all the pieces. We're trying to see how they will best coalesce to move forward. And when I have the person saying to me, I don't know, I'm so confused. I'm really not sure. Well, that shows me that something else is going on. And for those of us who have had childhood trauma or had emotions, things that have impact our emotions or our decision making or our self-trust in more ways than just the conventional sense of upbringing by other people, that everybody faces, then sometimes, yes, counseling is helpful and therapeutic, but that's beyond the scope of what I deal with and what I talk about. And I do not, engage in all of that. But that kind of gulf can create problems for people and a strong dissonance, a kind of cognitive dissonance for how they are able to handle things. And that is evidenced, whether you can name what illness that is, or, it's evidence to those of us in the outer world who have to engage people who have had that kind of impact, that they're going through something like that. And help is always a wonderful thing to get if that is the case. This can make self-awareness and self-trust somewhat suspect. I'm going to give you two examples of self-trust and confidence in our inner awareness and that kind of impact on our lives. I'm going to tell you two stories quickly here now. Both of them have to do with Washington, D.C. This first one was in the news. And the only reason that I have this story and I cherish it, because you know how people will interview someone who went through a very newsworthy event of some kind, dramatic event of some kind, and they'll often just put the mic under the person's nose. They'll say, "So what was going through your mind?" And then the person starts to answer the question, and then they whip the mic back and go into something else. In this particular case, in this particular one broadcast, this gentleman was actually able to answer the question, and I'm going to unfold it here. I think it was early in the week, perhaps a Monday morning. He was on a platform outside of Washington, D.C. I think it was in the Maryland area. Anybody who's familiar with that community knows that the metro goes underground in Washington, but then comes above ground in Maryland and in Virginia as it goes out into those other states. And that's an important element in this story, because it was an elevated platform. It had rails for the train, of course. And then there was a depression and rocks, stones underneath. Whereas if this had happened in town, underground, there's just concrete and the rails just stand a little bit above that concrete. So, and this is important for this story, people are waiting for the train to come in. This was some years ago, and the trains used to rush into the stations quite quickly. They've kind of slowed down a bit these days, but they used to come in very quickly. And everyone could see that the train was just seconds away. And a gentleman dressed in a suit fell down on the tracks, just fell down. Didn't look like he jumped, didn't look like he was trying to kill himself, looked more like he'd passed out. Fell on the tracks, slightly diagonal, did not hit the third rail, thankfully. Everybody's like, "Oh my goodness, oh my goodness, oh my goodness, what are we going to do?" And they're all panicking out there, because the train is coming in you can see it coming. There's not much time. There's mere seconds left. There was no time to jump down, have a few, maybe several men pick him up. He wasn't a very big person. Pick him up and maybe get him back up on the platform. No time. One man on that track had an answer. And I'm going to go through the steps, because this is emblematic of what the kind of work that I do represents, and not in these dramatic circumstances. Nobody is suggesting that any of us should put ourselves in these dramatic circumstances. But they asked him, "So what happened?" He said, "Number one, I just had this feeling. I had this intuition. I knew I could save this man." That was the first thought that came through his head. Second of all, because he had some mechanical background, he was not an engineer, but he had mechanical background. The next thing that flew through his mind was that there is an arc to the undercarriage of the train, and that there are stones underneath the rails, so there's a depression there. So came the analysis. That was the second thing. The third thing was his creative idea. He said he thought in his mind, "This man is small. I'm small too. If I jump down, pull him straight, and lay on top of him, the train will go over both of us." And that's exactly what he did. Of course, it did freak out the poor conductor, who must have thought, "Oh my goodness, I've killed two people," because the train had to be rolled all the way past the station in order to clear this area. And he himself admitted that he could feel the train rolling over the back of his body. But he did exactly what he said. It was in seconds. He jumped down, pulled the guy, laid down, and the train came. And he saved this man's life. Now, this is not something that I'm suggesting anybody should do. It was incredibly brave for him to do it. And he's probably the only one on that on that platform that day who could have done it because of various factors. The fact that he was small, that other man was small, and that he had the courage and the wherewithal and the self-trust to listen. He knew he could save the man. He knew he could do it. He knew there was going to be enough room. He figured it out logically, and then he had the creative outcome. I'm going to give you one other story, much lighter than this one. One other story. Again, about somebody with regard to self-trust. Here, this individual went with it, went with his self-trust, went with the whole picture that he'd put together in seconds. He knew this could work. This is a situation not quite as dramatic by any means, and it happened to me personally, again at a train station in Washington, D.C., except it was underground in Washington. And I was sitting on they have stone benches there, and I was sitting there waiting for the train to come. I think I was looking at my phone, and the train showed up, and I thought, oh, I've got to catch the train. I thought I'd had all my bags slung over my arm, right, on both sides, because I had several bags. I went dashing into the train. I'm moving into the car. And the train is there for additional seconds. I mean, it would have been enough time for me to run out if I'd have forgotten something. But this woman waits until the train doors are closing. They're closing. She comes up to me timidly and says, "Excuse me, was that your bag over there on the bench?" I'm looking at the bench that I just left. Yes, that was my bag. Not only was that my bag, that was my computer with a whole lot of other documentation in that bag. So needless to say, the blood is drained from me as I'm standing there because now the doors are closed and we're about to move. I just looked at her and she said, oh, because I saw it, but I thought maybe it wasn't yours, maybe. Then she kept saying over and over again before we got to the next station, I should have just said something. I should have just said something. I like she was in shock or something. I should have just said something. Well, yes, it wouldn't have hurt. What would she have lost? What would she have lost? Would she have been insulted if I'd have said, oh, no, that's not my bag? Well, that's okay. That's okay. You can say that. It would be all right. That's no horrible shame in having done something wrong. But here's somebody who was not working with self-confidence, not working with good self-awareness, and certainly not self-trust. And so I got off at the next stop and I had to wait. It took me about 10 minutes going down and back up. I did get back up to the station and thankfully my bag was still there and I was able to get it. But I just thought to myself when she kept repeating, I should have said something. I should have just said something. I wanted to say, yes, you should have just said something when I could have gotten out and gotten my bag. But she didn't trust herself enough to do something like that. Ultimately, self-trust and the resulting confidence that we develop becomes a strong foundation for resilience. It builds and builds and builds and builds. We just think, oh, yeah, self-trust. Oh, yeah, I trust myself. It's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about that kind of awareness, that kind of self-reliance that one has. I'm just going to give a quick example here of somebody else I know, a businessman, who said to me that he just doesn't go into a deal. He doesn't care if it looks good on paper. If it does not feel right, he knows he's missing something. He knows that he hasn't seen something. He knows that there is some other element that maybe he's picking up at some level, but he has to say no to the deal. Furthermore, he doesn't care whether that same deal would have worked perfectly for someone else. He knows it would not have worked for him because he has for years worked with his subjective awareness. And this I only elicited from him by starting this conversation. And it was a social kind of conversation, but from that came his insights and his perspective, because we all have our own subjective reality and our own way to get the clues, to pick up the cues, to figure it out. But if we have that relationship very, very firmly established and we work with it like a muscle that you work with, then yes, it's going to be there for us. In part 2, I go into more deeply into the kinds of things that I sometimes work with people on. It depends. If I'm sitting here helping some organization unroll a platform and help with the how of getting that done, the internal judgment and discernment that needs to be engaged in order for the team to be able to use and implement that platform, well, that's a very, very discrete, specific type of effort that I perhaps might be able to assist with in a given situation. Here, I'm talking in greater generalities. This whole presentation has to be in greater generalities. Know thyself is the precursor to self-trust. Pay attention. Learn learn to be present and conscious in doing things and in situations. Practice hyper consciousness. Now, that's usually when we think of hyper consciousness, we don't think of that as like a good thing, right? We don't think of hyper consciousness as good. But what I mean by hyper consciousness is take time, do little exercises with yourself. Sometime when you just have a free time, like me sitting at the train station. Had I not been staring at my phone, I might have been doing a hyper consciousness kind of exercise. Maybe I wouldn't have forgotten my bag. But the point is, by hyperconsciousness, take in what's going on. Take in the hum of things. Use the five senses that you have. See what other impressions those senses create and just play with it. This all doesn't have to be, kind of ponderously serious. It can be if you're dealing with a very, very serious situation, but it can be a lot of fun. There are games that can be played. I recently did a kind of, not a workshop, a sort of a talk where half of it I actually had exercises done. And we did a variety of different kind of psi exercises where we see what people can pick up visually and perceptually in different kinds of contexts. And it was fun. It was a great game to play. Playing with that kind of aspect of consciousness is one way to get that muscle going in ourselves in a more consistent and reliable way. Here's another thing. Exercising different ways of getting things done, knowing how to do things and approaching things from different angles. You'd be surprised how many people I've asked who actually don't know many ways to get to work. They don't even know alternate ways to get to work. They'd have to rely on some kind of detour. They have not worked that out. They've not tried it. They haven't gone to places that they wouldn't have to go to. They haven't explored in ways. In fact, I remember when I, was living in one community, because I've lived in different parts of the country over the course of my life. And this person was saying, "Oh my goodness, you went out there." And I thought, I'm not going out to the Mojave Desert or anything like that. If I get lost, I will ask someone. I will get my bearings. I will, check something on my phone. There are lots of things that can be done to find your way back. And I'm not suggesting here, doing things differently in a way that would present any kind of danger or a kind of appreciable damage of any sort. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about exploring a little, which takes us right into the next one. Stay curious. Stay curious, not nosy, not getting into people's business kind of curious, but have an interest in something. As the next point suggests, be willing to explore, be willing to try. And then, of course, at the end here, and there are other points that I could go into, but these are the few that I'd like to bring up here. Listen to your inner guidance. You don't have to act upon it, but paying attention will give you more options. Now, here are some ideas about negotiating the path. If you are in a situation where there is a lot of, conflict or drama or diametrically opposed views, this is great in business meetings when people are like talking like this in different directions, and there are a lot of frayed emotions. People talk about, oh, there shouldn't be any emotion in the workplace. I've never worked in any workplace where there have ever been meetings of any significance that didn't involve emotion. Doesn't mean people are screaming and shouting or doing anything like that, but there's always concern. There's always, the desire for a particular outcome, fear of certain challenges, perhaps anger that somebody has, one up somebody else and bringing something to the table. There's a lot of emotion. Sometimes we need to bring ourselves back to the present, to collect that energy, to pull in a little bit. Stop, perceive, respond. A breath, a break, a timeout, whatever that takes. And again, these are just, I'm just giving some hints and ideas here. Stepping back helps. And stepping back can just be lowering, slowing, taking that breath, perhaps asking for a question to be restated, giving yourself just that little bit of space to clear the mind. This speaks to subjective time also. That's a topic that I don't have room to really get into here, but your subjective awareness particularly if you're dealing with negotiations. I've done negotiation seminars and I've done negotiations myself, particularly when I worked for the aviation company. I've done some negotiations internationally as well as domestically. So you're dealing with people coming from different perspectives, different angles, different outlooks, different cultures sometimes. And it really helps to pull it all in, to pull it all back, and take a look at this picture. Because in the end, resourcefulness and resilience. You can only accept a situation, make changes and adaptations, or step away. I will repeat that because everything that you will hear in a variety of different workshops, seminars, different types of consultants talking about it, everybody's got a different voice, but there is no corner on this sequence of actions because they really are the predominant three things you can do in a situation that provides some kind of challenge for you. You can either accept the situation as it is. You can determine what kind of changes might be able to be employed, and that could be a variety. This is usually the big territory. Of the three choices, here's the big territory. And this is where someone such as myself gets involved in discussions, because here we can talk about what those options may be, what those consequences may be, and what tolerance there is for kind of risk benefit in the situation. And the last is to step away. Now, stepping away can literally be stepping out of the meeting for a minute before blowing off steam, stepping away from a client who might be very, very challenging and might be kind of driving you crazy. It could be that kind of stepping away, or sometimes it's stepping away entirely. It's dropping the client, dropping the situation. But that is usually, of course, a last plan Z, when all else has been exhausted. And don't let fear keep you from trying new things. Because that's the other thing. A lot of us who have issues with self-trust or issues with, and I tell you, I have worked, I can't name names, but I've worked with a couple of people you would be amazed. They are public figures and they don't have strong self-trust. They're always looking for validation from someone else. I mean, they are capable of moving forward. They're capable of being, self-actualizing and all that. But in terms of their confidence and self-trust, not so much. And so surprisingly to me to see that among people that you would think, wow, they're out there, they're successful, they're public figures. How can they really function like this? It's amazing to see who the people are who truly are internally successful, whether money or prestige or position or not. It's sometimes fascinating to see that. And then listen when you get answers. I'm going to give you a quick story here. This is a very simple little one. It's a silly one, but sometimes we have the answers and we're just ignoring them. We don't want to be bothered. I actually have this, and I have another quick story. So it was Christmas time, December 8th, one year. And I used to love to go to the mall to walk, to kind of walk the perimeter of the inside of the mall. On bad weather or whatever, the mall was open, and they encouraged people of all ages to be able to do the laps. Well, I came on a Sunday, and Sunday has different hours, and I couldn't figure out how to get into the mall. And it just occurred to me that one of the anchor stores might be open. I think Kohl's is open, is sort of the thought that I got. I thought, no, why would they be open? All these other big stores are closed. There's no reason for Kohl's to be open. I dismissed it. So now I'm running around. I'm looking for security. Security lets me in. We're filling out paperwork for them a lot. They radioed in. I had some kind of form to fill out. I get out into the mall through the office, and I'm like, all these people are walking around. And I asked one of them, I said, how did you guys get in? Kohl's was open. Well, this is a tiny, tiny example. Who knows why I had the thought that Kohl's might be open? Who knows where that comes from? We don't have all the answers on how and where our brains pick all sorts of things up. I may have heard it somewhere. Someone might have said it to me. I might have read it. Who knows? I certainly didn't remember it, and I didn't even buy into it, but there was my answer. I had the idea of getting my hair cut. It was New Year's Eve, and suddenly I get this idea to go to a salon that's like 7 miles, 8 miles away. And I'm thinking, why would I go there? It's New Year's Eve. This wasn't Christmas Eve. It was New Year's Eve. And why would I go there? Because they're either booked or they have a very small staff. Well, sure enough, I got there. There was somebody available and they took care of me. Now, these kinds of synchronicities happen. How and why they happen, how much we can rely on them to happen, that's a whole different story. But the point is, when you start to work, these are little small. What would it have hurt me to try Cole's door and see if it's open? And it didn't hurt me anything to drive down there. Sure enough, somebody did. Somebody was available for me. I mean, that sounds a little up there and kind of fairiness, but there it was. So listen when you get answers and try and see if it's worthwhile to check them out. Okay, oops, I think I missed one here. Part 3 is life happening. I give examples of people overcoming challenges, large and small, triumphs and tragedies. I kind of go into it. Here's a little one. This is about reaction and what implications there are to reaction. Okay, but this is life happening, more of life happening. This gentleman was behind my car, which was being driven by somebody else in LA. I was chatting with the driver, my friend, and suddenly I noticed that he looked up into his rearview mirror and his eyes, the pupils dilated, and he had this horror look on his face because we were heading on an off-ramp, but we had stopped. The guy behind us was going 60 miles an hour, and he was not stopping. I looked, which I should not have. If he'd have hit us from behind, my back would have been broken because I was twisted. I was looking and I was like, oh my goodness. He noticed last minute that he was about to hit us. So what did he do? He overcorrected and ran the car across 3 lanes. And miraculously, the other cars kind of got out of his way. They just thought that he was out of control. They didn't realize, because most cars going straight wouldn't have known that on a parallel, track, we were on that exit pavement. 3 lanes over. Then he overcorrects 2 lanes over. And then he corrects into the center lane and keeps going. And he didn't hit anybody anywhere. But that had to have been horrifying for him. It certainly was for us. And here is this example of what reaction sometimes creates. We sometimes need to have reaction rather than response. I touched upon the idea of responding earlier on, the idea of taking a moment and responding. But here I'm talking about the impact of reaction, which is the other thing. We either react or we respond. The man on the track where he rescued the person falling on the ground, that looked like a reaction. To everybody, it looked like a reaction. But in his mind, he had gone through all the steps. It was clearly a response. This was not a reaction. He'd gone through the steps. He had appreciated what the challenge was, and he went with it. So here, this guy, he had to react. This is a situation where you must react. And he didn't know or care where he was going when he went across 3 lanes. He just needed not to slam into us when we were standing backed up on this exit ramp. So he had to overcorrect in the other direction. Companies, countries often are in the same situation as individuals. Often when we have to go through a reaction, there may be some kind of correction necessary afterwards. That doesn't mean that the reaction was completely inappropriate, but whenever possible, it's great to have a response rather than a reaction. Occasionally, that's not possible. When talking about responding rather than reacting, I have a story in my book about a man in a Japanese prisoner of war camp. He was in a prisoner of war camp. I read this story. He was, at the time that I heard this story, he was actually in his 90s in a retirement facility. It was his birthday, and this was a piece in the paper. And he had been a prisoner of war in a Japanese prisoner of war camp. He'd been a young dentist with a small family, young family, small kids. And he was locked away for, more than 2 years. In fact, everybody thought he was dead. He was kind of missing. And then they found him and unearthed him and eventually released him. His back was completely broken. All of his fingers were twisted in different directions. He had no teeth. All of his vital organs were a mess. He'd been beaten and tortured, and he went through all of that for all this time. And he didn't, some people tried to mouth off, some people tried this, some people went into this reaction, that reaction. He just kept the faith, kept his trust, kept himself connected and collected. Miraculously so, it sounds. We obviously didn't get enough of the story, enough of the details on it. He made his way out. Now, he gets freed. He goes back to his family. They can't recognize him. They don't know who this man is. They've moved on. His family virtually rejects him. So now he's a broken mess, and he has no family. He's got no career. He was a dentist. He can't go do anything. He's not going to do that again. And he goes to see a number of doctors who all look at his organs and say, oh my goodness, basically, good luck, bless you, do whatever you feel you can in life. We don't give you more than 6 months. Your organs are destroyed. Well, he didn't know what to do at this point. He had some veterans benefits, so he decided, well, I think I'll go become a realtor. A realtor? Where did that come from? He just got the idea to study real estate and become a realtor. And this was in LA. So he kind of became a realtor to the stars, not necessarily all the stars, but he sold a lot of big homes and people liked him and he was very affable and he was kind of a character. He did have a lot of personality. And I mean, he looked like a mess, but I guess people didn't care or it didn't matter to them in terms of the service he provided and what he was able to facilitate for them. And so he created a whole new career and a whole new life for himself and ended up getting through to his 90s in a retirement facility. And he did die a couple of years after that, apparently. People tried to find out kind of what happened to him later, and he left. But he was already in his 90s. So this is what responding to life, responding to the challenges, working with all of your subjective awareness, working with all of those internal opportunities of awareness, of action, of development can do for you when dealing with challenges and opportunities. And I give, there are a number of different other examples in there. Not all of them are dramatic. Some of them are actually funny. And the last part that I deal with is business applications, the role of resolutions, what we resolve to do and how we resolve to do it, that function, and where and how we work with those and where we go with those. What sets your work apart in terms of your business, in terms of your entrepreneurship? How do you distinguish yourself? How do you use these resources, these internal resources, in order to help yourself move forward in inspired directions? And it doesn't matter if you have a gardening business. There's still ways to inspire a direction for your business that gives you an edge, that gives you a difference, that gives you something others don't really offer in the same way. Creative marketing, how to get there from here, some small or big leaps that need to be taken. So I do discuss some of that in the book, and we don't have time here to unpack a lot of this. I'm just going to kind of wrap some of these things up. And then when is a good deal not a good deal? When you are hungry, need the business, need things to come along, need it all to click, it's very, very tempting to take whatever comes. And sometimes we need to. Sometimes we need to make mediocre deals and arrangements because that's the expedient. And then we bite the bullet, get through whatever the challenges are that are associated with it. Sometimes we have to. But sometimes if we have the room and the scope to make a bigger, more visionary decision, sometimes you just need to not deal with that deal. On the other hand, also, when is letting go the best solution? Something looked like a great deal or looked like a wonderful prospect. How and when do you cut your losses? And what else can you do when that kind of situation comes up? Then when do you reach out for help and support? When, for example, when a partnership might be useful, or turning to resources. Just because you're expanding your perceptual awareness doesn't mean that you know everything. You do need to know when you need the assistance, when you need to reach out. And it also helps you then discern if who you're reaching out to and the types of resources you are reaching out to are really going to benefit you. And so that pretty much, I believe, wraps up where we are with this discussion today. I hope I've given everybody some ideas, some things to think about. I'm sure many of them you already have had it somewhere in your mind, but this is just another kind of wake-up call, perhaps, or perhaps it will inspire some of you to move in new directions with a more empowered and visionary sense.
Well, that was a great presentation, Danny.
Well, thank you so much.
And for some reason, no one's in a commenting mood tonight.
Well, that's all right. Maybe it's because it is a lot. So people kind of need to adjust a little bit. They need to think about it a little bit. There isn't necessarily an immediate question, because some of the stuff that I've talked about today has been meant to be for mulling over, for letting things roll around in your head. I did leave some of my information up there. We can put it up again. If people want to reach out to me, I would be happy to answer some questions or provide some ideas. This unfortunately, the slide is blurred. I didn't prepare it properly, but you can see my phone number. You can see that my email is dds@celafontus, CELAPHONTUS. You can find me on Facebook under D. Debney Shaw. You can find me on Instagram at hashtag Celafontus, LLC. And then a slightly longer LinkedIn where it's Danute-Debney Shaw is the end of the address. And you can find, but you can put in Danute Debney Shaw and it will pull up. So I can be reached in a number of ways, and I'm happy to have folks contact me if they want to. And if they've had a chance to mull things over a bit and then suddenly thought, wait, she said this, but what about? And they can connect with me.
Okay, well, I want to encourage everyone, if you liked what you saw tonight and everything, to get out there and be sure to give us that thumbs up. We can really appreciate it. I just got to get used to these controls here. I've been watching a lot of these Ukraine guys, with their little podcasts and everything. And
yeah.
if they pick up stuff like that little thumbs up thing, I really like that.
Yes.
Yeah, and I'd like to encourage everyone again, to consider coming to the conference. I believe Danny's going to be there, and you'll be able to pick up her book there. If not, you can get it through Amazon, I guess, right now.
You can get it through Barnes and Noble. You can get it through Amazon. It's distributed through Ingram, so actually any independent bookstore can order it for you. So it's available all over the place, really.
And once I get my catalog going again, I'll probably be in there too, But again, August 9th to 13th, please pre-register 520-463-1994. We could use the support. Don't let the fear of the economic situations these days scare you off, because life goes on. And right now we're doing everything we can to keep the prices down. I mean, I got the hotel the same rates as last year. And we always have a good lineup of speakers and everything. So be sure to give us a call and get registered. And if you start planning now, things become very, very affordable, because you could take advantage of special rates, if you already have in your mind to come, okay, when you see like airline rates, all of a sudden there's a sale on it, you can jump on it because you're going to be there and stuff like that, and I don't know, Dan, if you had a chance to last year at our conference, and we had like an evening.
Oh, I was there. I wasn't able to listen to everybody, but I dropped in on a number of wonderful talks. It was great.
Every evening we have something to eat, so between the free breakfast with the hotel and the thing at night, you pretty much got it made. You might have to fast through lunch there, or I'm working on getting some good deals going there too. So anyway, I encourage you all to go ahead and get signed up for that, and also consider becoming a member of the YouTube thing. And one last thing, I'd like to apologize this week because for some reason when I built the program, I didn't get the dates right, and that's come. It wasn't listed as live, until today because I noticed it today. But I fixed it, but it was too late. But we still got a good showing though. And again, I'd like to see. I don't know what I'm going to do next week or not. Now I think it's Super Bowl next week, is it not?
Oh, it may be.
And then the week after that's going to be the LAX. They're having the Conscious Life Expo. So I don't know if I'm going to have shows of that yet. Just keep your eyes open in the mail. And thank you so much. And y'all have a good evening. And thank you, Debney, for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
In broadcast.